about millionaires, billionaires, and politics, there are a few people who come to mind right away, specifically when it comes to conservatives. Charles and David Koch, a.k.a. the Koch brothers. You probably know their political network raised $400 million during the 2012 election cycle. But how about the name Paul Singer? Not ringing any bells? He's the New York billionaire who Politico reported last week helped launch the club called the American Opportunity Alliance to bring together some of the richest pro-business GOP donors in the country, several of whom share Singer's support for gay rights, immigration reform, and the State of Israel. Politico reports that the club will host a closed-door meeting at a swanky Colorado resort this week. Among those expected to attend, House Speaker John Boehner and New Hampshire Senator Kelly Ayotte, according to the report. But wealthy conservatives aren't the only ones putting their money where their politics are. One financier is about to test how well one-percenter politics work to address what is often perceived as a liberal issue. Democrat Tom Steyer founded one of the world's most successful hedge funds and spent millions to help elect his candidates of choice in last year's elections, including $11 million to help Terry McAuliffe become Virginia's new governor. Now, Steyer wants to build a $100 million war chest to tackle climate change during the 2014 election season. NBC's Chuck Todd on Friday's edition of the Daily Rundown asked Steyer about the influence of wealthy donors in politics.
There have been some legal decisions, some court decisions, which I absolutely disagree with, like Citizens United, which have led to this explosion of money, which I think...
Do you believe you should not be allowed to be doing this? That you should not be, you've pledged $100 million, $50 million as your own. Do you believe you should not legally be able to do this?
I believe there should be a different system.
You know, I wish I had $100 million. I believe in climate change. I think it's important that we actually advance. But is that what I would choose? Is that what 100 million voters would choose? Maybe they would want that money put towards advocating for job creation. In fact, polls showed that's probably what they would want. You know, it's become a plutocracy.
And I mean, Avik, I'm curious because on the right, you know, a lot of the argument is, well, you know, people don't want these liberal policies. But when you have so much money being poured in to shape public opinion, particularly in core Republican districts and core Republican areas, are we really seeing the democratic process say that we don't want unionization, we don't want higher wages? Or are we really seeing that warped by a few people who stand to personally benefit by, you know, by the ordinary citizens in their states making less money, taking less wages, etc.?
You know, it's so interesting because this is one of those issues where the way the progressive movement looks at this issue and the way the conservative movement looks at this issue are very, very different. Liberals and progressives tend to worry about, well, maybe we'll be outgunned, maybe the rich people will support policies that we don't like, and that will be an unfair advantage. The way the conservatives look at this is different. It's a First Amendment issue. Congress shall pass no law abridging the freedom of speech, and that's why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did in Citizens United, because they felt that the law was a violation of the First Amendment. And so I know that liberal Supreme Court justices don't necessarily agree with that, but it's a constitutional position more than it's a position about the outcomes of where the money will play out and who influences elections.
But should money buy you more speech than me?
It's, you know, it doesn't, you know, we have our votes, right? So the votes are what, the money doesn't necessarily influence the elections, right? So it's not really, it's
so
not,
why spend it? Somebody's losing a lot of money for nothing.
We all have the freedom to start a newspaper, start a blog, to talk.
You don't have the money to do it. That's the thing. Is not everyone has the money to do it. So, I mean, I'll ask you the question too.
But you can't, you know, you can't. How do you level the playing field with that legally? You really can't, because to do so necessarily abridges the freedom of speech.
I mean, when you're in a situation, in a system where 0.01% of the richest Americans gave 40% of the campaign dollars in 2012, you have to ask yourself, who has the louder voice here?
All right, we need to take a quick break. In the current issue of Mother Jones magazine, our guest Andy Kroll has a feature about the family of billionaire Richard DeVos Sr., Amway Corporation co-founder and current chairman of the Orlando Magic Ownership Group. According to Kroll, since 1970, DeVos family members have invested at least $200 million on a host of right-wing causes, think tanks, media outlets, political committees, evangelical outfits, and a string of advocacy groups. They've spent $44 million alone in Michigan just in the past 17 years, and it's borne fruit. The DeVos family helped make Michigan a state synonymous with the power of organized labor, a right-to-work state.
Even a few days before Right to Work was introduced in Michigan, it was thought to be dead on arrival. And look where we are now. Rick Snyder signed it into law. Michigan is a Right to Work state.
And I mean, Avik, you as also a Michigan native, I believe you said, is this really the kind of democracy we want? I mean, Andy's piece talks about really, pushing lawmakers to do something that they didn't tell their constituents they were going to to do, and also using it as a template to, quote, defund the left, to basically take away their opposition's even opportunity and option to fight them, and essentially impose this idea and this will, not just on Michigan, but on states that have unions right now all over the country. Is that the kind of democracy we want?
Andy's piece was terrific, and hats off to him for writing it, because it was really fascinating, as you said. I think one thing that's really important to realize, and this goes back to the point I was making before the break, is right to work was supported by 70% of the people in the state of Michigan.
It was not. It was underwater in the polls not long before the DeVos family started getting in there and really pushing it.
Well, as Andy reports in the story, they did a bunch of polls on a bunch of issues, and they found there was 70% support for right to work, and that's why they went forward with pushing for that issue. And remember, there's money, power, and a lot of influence, political influence with the labor unions that was already there, right? So it's not like there was some just sort of popular sentiment that was being reflected in the way the state laws were already set up. There were labor unions that were powerfully influencing politicians and pressuring politicians to support or to oppose right to work and support the previous initiative to embed that in the Constitution. So, if anything, what the DeVos family did in Michigan shows that if you have public sentiment already on your side, yes, you can leverage that to pressure legislatures and politicians to do what the public already supports.
But there was also a quote in the pieces that Andy has done, that one of the members of the DeVos family, one of the wives, said, well, the problem in Michigan is high wages. One problem we have is too much regulation and high wages. Do you think that's a popular sentiment, that, yeah, our wages are too high?
Well, certainly not today. But of course, if you have high wages that are economically inefficient, then you have high costs, right? And again, it goes to the products that are too costly. Why did all those auto jobs go away in Detroit, right? It's because there were inflexible labor laws that led the cars that were produced in Detroit to be inefficiently produced, not as high quality, too expensive for the labor costs. Toyota could spend enormous amounts of money on R&D. That's why all these foreign car companies have put their auto plants in right to work states.
I feel like somebody should jump in. We're back to arguing that we need lower wages. All right, indeed. Thank you so much, Andy Crow. Great reporting coming from Washington, D.C. And also thank you to Tamara Drought and Avik Roy here in New York.